Hello, everyone, and welcome to the RV Connects podcast. This is episode 36, and today we are talking about GPS, specifically whether you need an RV-specific GPS when you are out on your road trips. So we, of course, are the RV Connects, a Canadian family of 4 weekend warriors with a goal to see all of North America in the next 10 years, and we are taking you right along for the ride with our uniquely Canadian perspective on RV travel. We talk tips, tricks, and campground reviews among other random stories, and we are super pumped that you're here. If you already know us, welcome back. If you're new to the show, thanks for finding us. Reach out and let us know how you've discovered us. We always love to hear listener stories. You can send us a message on Instagram or Facebook at RV Connects or by email at hello@rvconnects.com. That's RVCANUCKS.com. We are super excited to be back in studio together for the first time in 7 months, and it really does feel so much better, if maybe a little rusty. So if you're new, Dan has just returned home from a 6-month military deployment, so we basically had to adapt our 2021 episodes to the situation. So we had some pre-recorded episodes, we had some guests, which I think we will probably continue with from time to time because I think they added a lot of value to the show. But we're happy to be back and in person and planning some fresh new content for you this camping season. So welcome back, Dan.
Thank you. I just wanted to say hello to everybody, and I wanted to give a big shout out to Trucker Dave. And so around about episode 34, we got some listener mail, and Trucker Dave told a story about how these college kids tossed a skunk in the cash box of a toll highway. And so I told that story to the troops while we were deployed, and they thought it was absolutely hilarious, and we had a great 15-minute laugh session on that kind of prank there that they had pulled, and the troops thought it was hilarious. So big shout out to Trucker Dave for raising all of our morale. And it is good to be back in the studio. We are a bit rusty. Melina's just overwhelmed by my handsomeness, and this is like take 3,781 to shoot this episode because I'm just so amazing.
Yeah, he's not lying, folks. So speaking of fresh content, just yesterday afternoon, we completed the planning of our epic 2021 summer adventure, which is a roughly 9,000 kilometer road trip to Banff and Jasper National Parks. We are heading out through Canada and back through the States if the border will allow us to do so kind of end of August. And all of that planning got us thinking about GPS and trip planning. So people's opinions on whether you need an RV-specific GPS are pretty much as wide and varied as their opinions on whether you can put toilet paper in your black tank. And if you want more on that, go back to episode 2. But the point is, there's a ton of opinions, no matter which way you look at it. So we basically decided that we would have a deeper look at some of the pros and cons of the major methods of GPS available, let you know some of the experiences we've had with each, and we'll even let you know why good old paper maps just might be a secret weapon. So I think it's probably important, maybe before we dive into the specifics, to just talk about some general GPS tips.
Yep, absolutely. So just a few tips that go along with just about any type of app or GPS that you're going to use. I think we got 7 here. The first one is trust but verify. So once you've punched in all your information and right before you hit start or drive, the GPS is going to give you an option to preview the route. It's on you to preview the route and make sure that the route looks right, that it's not taking you down some random gravel road or through some farmers only type road across his ranch. Like it needs to be taking you on the highway and that kind of thing. That's on you to make sure that the road makes sense or the route that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And I think probably a good example of that would be somewhere like Moab when we were in Moab. And, you know, there's a lot of like dirt roads, public lands, and GPSs can take you down some of these roads. And I know, for instance, you know, the Mill Canyon Dinosaur Track site, which is just off Route 191 outside of Moab, there's a dispersed campground. And the road to get there is a little sketch, and a GPS might route you there, which, you know, you're pushing it with a 30-foot trailer, but you probably could make the route. But the thing is, there's a set of railroad tracks that you have to cross, and it's in an area that's so dry. You've got that really typical like red dirt, and it's also really prone to flash floods. So, you know, it's on you. If that GPS routes you there, you want to go to that location to not only maybe look at the GPS, but look at a satellite view, look at the weather for the next couple of days or for the duration of your trip, and make sure that what you are planning makes sense given the situation that you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. So tip number 2 is make sure that you have your settings set correctly. And so within the app, you can avoid toll roads, you can avoid ferries, you can make a series of settings, and those things will help you pick the right route, shortest route, fastest route, all those kind of things. You should go in and make sure that those are set correctly. So for example, Melina told you that we were planning a road trip for the summer, and Google kept wanting us to take a ferry across Lake Michigan. And we had our reasons why we didn't want to take the ferry across Lake Michigan, but it's on us.
$300 charge for one?
Well, and trying to get there on time is another thing, but we didn't want to take the ferry, and we had our reasons for that, but Google kept wanting us to do that. So just make sure you have all your settings correct to get a route that's happy for you.
For sure.
Tip number 3 is keep an eye on factors that could affect your travel conditions. So you can do that by, following the local news, listening to the local radio station, following kind of signboards at the side of the highway, all of those sources of information. And the reason that you want to do that is you might even want to look 2 or 3 days out, because there are going to be portions of a long road trip where there is only one way through a specific area. So for example, on our road trip, we're going to follow the Lake Superior coast. But if forest fires get in the way for part of that journey, we have an option to get around parts of that, but we would have to make that decision, a day and a half before we actually transit that area. So right now, there's a bunch of forest fires in northwestern Ontario. We're just keeping an eye on it. Nothing's closed, but we're going to be definitely looking ahead to see if we need to reroute, because there'd be nothing worse than finding a closed highway and having to double back 12 hours for the shortest detour. And that goes for snowstorms and all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
4th one is download offline maps or have a paper backup. Copy of a map is a good idea, because if you lose your signal, you lose your phone, it falls in the water, you smash it in a door and destroy your phone, who knows what happens. You've got a backup to get you down the road, and you don't lose too much time before you can get those problems fixed. Number 5 is hand the kids a map. And so if you've got young kids, I dare say even tweens and teens, give them a paper map. And it can be a road map, it can be a road atlas, it can be even just a map of a tourist region that you pick up at a welcome center. That lets kids follow along. And so that keeps them entertained in the back seat. And I think that they probably learn a little bit better by holding a paper map that they can explore and look at and follow along as you go. And it also teaches them map reading skills, because it's still a skill that you need in life. You need to know how to read a map, whether it's a road map, whether it's, a map of a transit system or
terminal map
at an airport.
I think it's important too, like teens and tweens, great. They can probably help you navigate. And if you come across something on your GPS that's unexpected, if they already know how to read a map and route, while somebody's Googling a different route or something, they can actually have a look at the map and say, oh, actually, I see a road that might take us a little further east or something. Like, I think, like Dan said, you can't underestimate that skill in life. But even when they're little, even when they're wee, you can give them a map and you can kind of circle where you're starting and circle where you're ending. And you can say, between here and our campground that's 3 hours away, or our campground that's 24 hours away, like how many major towns do you see between there, right? And they'll see only have like 4 towns until we get there. And that 4 towns might be a 20-minute drive, or it might be, a 20-hour drive. And either one of them is okay, but it kind of gets them involved in that route and helps them see the progress that you're making instead of just like scenery flying by outside the window.
And it's also pretty inexpensive way to keep your kids occupied, because chances are you're going to stop at a welcome center, you're going to be at a tourist information, and you'll be able to pick up those maps for free, toss them a pencil in the back seat, they can check them off as you go.
And you can even quiz them, like, which grid is like this city, and then they can kind of like line up. It's, oh, this one's in J15, and just teach them general map skills, because I guarantee you they're going to use it. And the best example I can give is like the last time, maybe think about when you were in a store and the power went out or the POS system went down and you were paying with cash, and the young person who might have been working, chances are they probably didn't even know how to count cash back to you. Whereas when I was a teenager and I got my first job at McDonald's, like my mother sat there with me and like made me count change back. So if something broke, I would know how to make change. And I think it's just one of these skills that never goes out of fashion. Like, you're always going to need it at some point in life.
Absolutely. Tip number 6 is turn the notifications off on your phone if that's what you're using as your GPS device, especially if you have it mounted up on the dash or something like that. You want to turn off the texting, the email alerts, all those kind of things, because they're a distraction to you actually driving and kind of get in the way.
And I would say on that same vein, which is tip number 7, is know where it's illegal to have a windshield mounted GPS on your vehicle. And I was actually shocked when I went through the list. Like there's places that we travel regularly and places that we've certainly traveled before where it's completely illegal to have anything mounted on your windshield, which is really, in my opinion, it's the most convenient place to have it. But there's 16 states and there's 3 provinces where it's illegal to use a windshield mounted GPS device, or a phone mounted on your windshield. And the rest of them, even if it's legal, there seems to be a lot of restrictions around maybe where you can mount it. You know, whether it's you can only mount dash or lower, you can't mount it in a cup holder because it's too low. Some of them specify that it has to be like in the lower 5 inches of the driver's side windshield or the lower 7 inches of the passenger side. So there are a lot of rules about it. I'm going to I'll have a brief table on the blog and maybe on the show notes as well that just kind of list those states and provinces where it's illegal, legal, and kind of a gray area, and you can decide. But the reason that's important is if you get into trouble, you get pulled over for speeding, you get into an accident, and you're in a location where that is illegal to have it on your windshield, you're probably going to want to take it off there.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm sure the laws come from a well-meaning spot. Like they want drivers to be able to see, and so somebody's created a rule about that. And then, of course, you live in Ontario where they don't want you to text and drive, so they encourage you to mount it to your dash, and it gets really confusing. So use a little bit of common sense, and like Melina says, if you get pulled over, take it off your dash so the cop doesn't see it.
Types of GPS. Let's go on to that now, because I think it's probably important to review kind of the major types of GPS you can use. Some of them are regular, some of them are specifically for an RV, and we've kind of detailed the big ones and we've detailed the ones that we have a lot of experience with. So maybe let's look at the pros and cons of some of the most common options.
So the first option we'll talk about is your onboard nav that comes with your tow vehicle. And so that's the GPS that's built into the dash of your vehicle. And so we can't talk about every single manufacturer that's out there. So we'll just talk about our 2016 F-150, which, you know, it's got to be 5-6 years old now. I suppose it's not the newest technology, but my goodness, it was well into navigation systems. And I do have a couple of pet peeves with this thing that I'm not happy with. But the pro of this for our F-150 is it's a nice big screen that's built into the dash. And so that's easy for everybody in the car to see. And it also doesn't tie up somebody else's phone on the dash. So it simplifies things on the dash and makes it easier for passengers on long road trips that they can scroll through their phones and read messages.
Or find a last minute place to stay.
Exactly. Find last minute places to stay or places to eat or that kind of thing. So that's really handy that it doesn't tie up the phone. It's got a big screen. The con to this is even when the maps are updated, it's not nearly as accurate as Waze or as Google. And quite often we find ourselves struggling for it to pick up a legitimate street address or point of interest, all that kind of stuff. And it doesn't automatically update. So, you know, you have to actually go in and make it update, which is not a feature we're a big fan of either.
Right.
Overall, it's good when you're on a route or a highway that you're familiar with. If you're going to travel down a highway, you know, the Trans-Canada or an interstate for several hundred kilometers or miles, and you're just kind of using it to see how long till you get there.
It's pretty accurate.
Yeah, it's accurate. And it's great for that. But you know, there are times that I don't want to use it. And one of those places that I'm not a fan of using it is I don't like using it in US cities. And I don't know if this is me or just a design flaw, but
I would say it's a design flaw. Sorry, Ford.
It doesn't visually display transfer lanes and exits and which lane you need to be in a way that seems to make sense to what I see on the road. And so more than once I've ended up in the wrong lane based on what this thing has told me to do. And so when we do that through a city, and I mean following an interstate through a city, we tend to flip back to Google or Waze.
And I think I probably, what was it, like 40 minutes that we took a wrong exit in Las Vegas, and it took 40 minutes to try to find the interstate again. It was awful and very, very stressful. So yeah, I would say that's probably a design flaw. It's just not intuitive for, like you said, what you see on the road. I think it is a good tool, even if you're using another type of GPS device, that you can set it for like the biggest major city or town to where you're headed. And then because that screen is big enough that the kids can see it from the back seat, if you have it set, you know, for just the time to arrive, then it kind of eliminates that every 5-minute question. How long till we're there? Are we there yet? And if they can see it and they can read numbers, they know how long it's going to be till you get there.
Absolutely. Like, for example, on our trip, you know, we're going to go all the way from Oakville through Sudbury, through Sault Ste. Marie and up to White River. I'll punch in White River. I know how to get there without a GPS, and I don't need the exact street address in White River, but it gives us an idea of how much longer it is till we get to that location. So there's a good example of what we're talking about. Second type, pretty common. I think everybody's probably used it at one time or another, is Google Maps on your phone. It's very user-friendly. It's linked to your web searches. So if you find a restaurant or a place that you want to get groceries, it's real easy to just hit directions and then it'll pop right up and you just follow that. So that's really good. It does offer traffic and speed alerts, but I think that probably not as good as Waze, but it does offer that. The other pro that I would say is it's real easy to jump into the satellite view, and where we use the satellite view is, can we get into a specific gas station or a mall parking lot, or what's the best way to get in without driving down a dead end with the trailer behind us.
Or to find, hidden dirt roads. If you pop into satellite view, you can very easily see whether a road it's going to take you down is something like a dirt road or a gravel road that you have no business being on. I think that with Google too, waypoints can be really, really helpful. Like Dan said, when we plugged in our GPS adventure for 2021 and it had us taking that ferry across Lake Michigan, which we didn't want to do, I will just use a waypoint and I will pick a major gas station or a truck stop or like a Cabela's that I know is on like a major interstate of like where our preferred route is. If it wants to route me a different way, even if we're not stopping there, I just add that as a waypoint into Google Maps, and that gets you around that automatic routing you somewhere where you don't want to be. It's a little more work when you're doing your actual plan, but if you know, like, no, I definitely do not want to go on this ferry, you just pick something south on a major interstate, and Google's really easy to find because you just kind of Google Cabela's in this town or something, and then you just put it in as a waypoint and it'll automatically route you around the way that you don't want to go.
And so overall verdict, I'd say we use this a lot. It's probably our go-to app that we use most of the time. And it's got, it's built into our road trippers map is set to Google, but I will talk about that a little bit later.
Oh, Waze.
So this is the third one that we're going to talk about. Used Waze a lot, especially when I was deployed, but I even used it in Ontario, and I think it's a much better app for indicating where speed traps are, disabled vehicles, construction zones, even railroad crossings. It's better for speed limits. I'll talk about speed limits in a little bit, but the reason I like to get those alerts about, say, a railroad crossing or a construction zone, especially in an area that I'm not familiar with, is that there's nothing worse than getting up to speed and then coming around a bend and finding out, there's a disabled vehicle and you need to get over, or you're coming up on a railroad crossing and you need to slow down. So all of a sudden there's a big rush to slow the truck down and everybody slides forward and drinks are at your feet. So that gives you some advance warning and stops you from coming up to full speed when you're only going to have to slow down again. So I really do like that feature. The speed limits is good. I think that the speed limits is especially helpful in an area that you're not familiar with. So if you're not sure what the speed limit is, it lets you know what the speed limit is. And then of course, if the speed limit drops unexpectedly and you don't catch it, it lets you know, the speed limit dropped and you can adjust accordingly. The part that I don't like is it lets me know when I'm speeding. And I know that I'm speeding, and sometimes I want to be speeding. And anybody who tells you that they don't speed is probably lying, but I don't need to know about that every single time, but I do find it helpful.
And I would say Waze, like the beauty of Waze is probably it's meant as a commuter tool, right? So not necessarily for somebody who's hauling a rig, but I think that it's an excellent as a standalone tool. If you're like unhitched from your tow vehicle and you're going on day trips in an area you're unfamiliar with, Waze absolutely top of the line for stuff like that.
The thing with Waze is there's a lot of information in it, and I think sometimes there can be too much information, and so you really have to be careful and go in there and figure out what do you really need to see for the information that's going to make for the best user experience. And sometimes it just gives me too much information that draws my attention away from the road, and I'm better to just do this old school and look out the windshield and put my hands at 10 and 2 and take my time. So that's the drawback to Waze. The other thing I would say is Waze, make sure that you go into your privacy settings and make your route invisible if you kind of want to maintain your privacy, because it will connect to other apps and share that information. And my personal opinion is we share way too much information with the general public that they don't need to know. So make sure you spend a little bit of time and go in there and adjust that.
So let's maybe move on to RV specific GPS solutions. So we're going to look at standalone RV GPS, and we're going to look at some RV specific apps. So first, in a standalone unit, so that's things like, a Garmin, a TomTom, Magellan, Rand McNally, they all have RV versions that are separate from their automobile versions that you purchase. That's a standalone unit, and you use that in your vehicle as your GPS. Some of the great things about them is that you generally get larger screens, like a 7 or 8 inch screen that you can see a little better. They're really good for voice navigation. Some of them have have integrated roadside assistance when you purchase them. Some of them have dash cams if you're into that and that's important to you. So there are some very good pros about them. I think overall, the biggest kind of cons against them is the price. I think, at the very low end, you're forking out $250 up to like upwards of $700 for a device that essentially only does one thing, and that's GPS, right? I think overwhelmingly these units, they've come a really long way, but I still think the biggest complaints about them is that there's difficulties when updating maps, the amount of time it takes to update a map if you really need to go on the fly, if you don't have a strong Wi-Fi connection when you're on the road, so you can run into some problems that way if you need to have map updates. I think there's sometimes programming difficulties with some of them in terms of like if you want to program to miss tolls. I think there's a few brands that are known for like it doesn't hold that information in and you keep having to reset the settings, that type of thing. And I don't know that you get the same quality of real-time updates that you're going to get with something like Google or even a newer, like an RV specific app. I think overall it's great if you don't have onboard nav, if you don't own a smartphone, if you're just comfortable with GPS as a technology, as a standalone technology. I think there's some of them, if you don't have Bluetooth or anything like that available to you while you're driving, some of them, there's an option to like download podcasts and music playlists and things, which can really elevate your road trip experience and make the miles travel easier, if you have something different to listen to than the radio or some CDs or something like that. So there are some really good overall reasons to get it. I think at the end of the day for us, though, it just ends up being another gadget that we probably don't need to have.
And we can't RV 12 months of the year because the kids need to go to school. The weather in Canada is just not conducive to that. Mm-hmm. But maybe if you can RV 12 months of the year, maybe you live on the road full time or at least half the year and do a lot of miles, it might make more sense.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that if I'm going to drop $700 on something like that, the guy at the showroom is going to show me how it works before I spend my money, or I'm going to watch a few YouTube videos to make sure that it's going to suit my needs before I spend that money on features I may or may not use.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. RV navigation app. So there's two really big ones that everyone tends to use, and you're either going to use like Road Trippers / Togo RV to plan your trip, or you're going to use RV Trip Wizard, which is the other one. And each of those have their own specific RV navigation app, like turn-by-turn direction. So Togo has its own that's built into the Togo app, which comes with Road Trippers Plus and Togo Plus. And then you have RV Trip Wizard uses an app called RV Life. So you can access that through RV Trip Wizard, or you can download that app as a standalone app on its own, and that's about $70 a year. So I would say it's great because in both of those, the biggest pros and the reason people get RV specific GPS is that you can enter the specifications for your rig. So your height, your weight, your width, your length, whether you're carrying propane, whether because of that you want to reroute through tunnels, because as we all know, you cannot go through a tunnel with your propane on, all of those kind of things. So there's a lot of customization, which is specific to the fact that you're towing a gigantic or maybe a very small trailer behind you. But when you're towing, you have a different list of needs, right? Each of these have basic campgrounds and waypoints that you can add in to the GPS. However, it's nothing even close to what you would get with like a proper trip planner or using Google to add waypoints. So it is basic in that way, but I love that you can set it to avoid everything from tunnels to dirt roads to traffic to tolls. So there is a whole lot more customization, which I think is really, really valuable when you're towing an RV. I think for RV Life, that app, you have better automatic height and weight based on your model year. So you put in your model year, your make and model, and it automatically populates all of those fields for you. So you kind of don't need to know it. Whereas the Togo RV app, you have to enter that manually, which is fine too. It's probably not a bad idea to know those specifications first, but the RV Life in my box is a little bit higher just because it automatically throws it in.
The thing to remember when it automatically throws it in is it's pretty close, but it doesn't know how many groceries you put in there. It doesn't know how much extra stuff you've packed in the trailer, bikes, fishing poles, clothes, all that kind of stuff. So know that your trailer actually might be a little bit heavier because it doesn't know that. It also doesn't know if you've put on a roof rack or something else and put stuff above that. That's on you to know that hey, it's pretty close approximation, but still it's your responsibility to know exactly what your height is.
Right. And if something populates at like 7,000 pounds dry weight and you know that you're closer to like 10, you need to change that aspect so it can really work in a way that's going to make sense for you. Specific to Togo, I think it's a lot better, or the pros for Togo is that it does show RV service centers and mobile RV techs who happen to be near you when you're using the GPS, which I think is fantastic. I mean, we do have roadside assistance, but if we're stuck in a pickle and we need to pay somebody to help us get out of a dangerous situation, we're calling a mobile RV tech, or if we're going to be stranded without it, I think it's great to have that information right near you. I think there's really good overnight stop options in Togo as you're going through. If you've got it on the turn-by-turn RV GPS, you can just choose to drop a pin and it will populate places to stay, free places to stay for overnight, like boondocking options. I think Togo is better because it does give you the option to switch between kilometers and miles, which is really helpful if you're going both north and south of the Canada-US border. And the RV Life app, on the other hand, if you can switch it to kilometers, I cannot find it for the life of me because I have played around in that app for a really long time and I can't see it. So correct me if I'm wrong or tell me where to switch it to kilometers, because right now it only allows for miles.
The other thing to know as well, especially in Canada, is even Canadians are going to talk about the height of their RV in feet, but the government puts the clearance on a bridge in meters. So even if you know that your trailer's at 10, 11 feet tall, you still need to convert that to meters so that you know if you're going to fit under a bridge or not.
Mm-hmm. So overall, I would say with RV specific apps, I think they're a great value add. Again, I don't know if I would use them as the only standalone option because I don't think that perfect option exists. I feel like if you could blend Togo and RV Life together, you'd get a little closer to that perfect RV GPS, but that's not possible. So I think I still will go with Togo for the reasons that I mentioned, like the ability to go from kilometers to miles and back again, choose meters, choose feet, however we want it. I find there's a little more customization. Both Togo and RV Life are fairly new to mapping Canada. And Togo right now has the upper leg on how many waypoints on routes, on parks, on overnights that are available in Canada. So right now that still has an edge over RV Life for me. And I will continue probably to use the Togo RV specific GPS when we need it, because that's the one that pairs with road trippers. And you all know how much we love road trippers, whereas we don't really use RV Trip Wizard, which is fine. It's a great app, but I just find the functionality and the usability of road trippers to be a little better, or it syncs a little better with how I like to plan trips. So at the end of the day, Dan, do you need an RV specific GPS?
Do I need an RV specific GPS that comes with a dash cam? Probably not, but I could use a GoPro Hero 9.
Well, I guess if you're not forking over $700 for an RV specific Garmin, you could do that.
What you can't see is me winking at Melina here right now, trying to look cute.
You just got a new truck for your birthday.
Yes.
Well, a new old truck. For those of you who have seen our Instagram, Dan got like a 1987 square body Silverado.
So, I think we're happy with what we're using. I think we'll continue to use Togo. We use road trippers. We use all of that stuff, combination of Waze, Google, and the onboard nav system, because there are pros and cons to each of them, really, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of good reasons you might want access to an RV specific GPS. And like Dan said, I'm sure our opinion might change if we were on the road 12 months a year, which we're not. Then we might invest in a standalone unit or something. But I think you always want to maintain that option to have access to something like that, specifically for long trips, when you haven't been somewhere before, if you're boondocking so you don't get stuck on roads that you have no business being on, especially if you are going through like an unfamiliar city, and if your nav takes you on the wrong exit or you accidentally get off when you're not supposed to, you might encounter an overpass, particularly in an older city that is not high enough for your rig. So I think there's some really, really good reasons you might want it in certain situations, but I think what we're trying to stress, and at the end of the day, you never want that set it and forget it mentality, right? Like we use multiple tools because we have multiple situations we encounter on the road, right? And I think, having a GPS of any type is never a substitution for that awareness and the research you need. The GPS I use to get me from here to Kingston, Ontario is different than the GPS I'm going to use to get me to Banff, right? And it might change a couple of times a day based on what we're facing and the time of day we're traveling, etc.
Yep, and kind of my last thoughts on this is when you were a kid and you were going somewhere and you got lost, it wasn't the paper map's fault and it wasn't Map Atlas' fault. It was because of the co-pilot read the map wrong. Somebody made a mistake.
What are you saying, Dan?
That's what I'm trying to say to people is it's still on you to know the route, know where you're going, and be aware of your surroundings when you program it in. The other thing, we didn't talk about this. The nav system on our F-150 is free. I mean, the truck is not free, but we don't pay a monthly service for that. Google Maps, I don't pay a monthly service for that.
Yeah.
And Waze, I downloaded it for free. So yeah, there's the cost of my phone and the data and all those kind of things, but I haven't paid an extra fee for those things.
And at the end of the day, you're not a bad RVer if you choose not to use an RV specific GPS, but just be aware of the situations where you might find that useful or where that might be good for you. So I guess I would end this show by asking all of you if you use an RV specific GPS, number one. Number two, if you have a favorite GPS system that you use. I have heard a lot of people who use trucker specific GPSs and they seem to love those for RVing, but let us know. Get in touch with us and let us know what you use, why you love it, and we will share it next episode in 2 weeks. If you give us some options that we have not considered, or maybe other reasons why you love or dislike some of the things we've talked about today. With that said, happy travels. We are so looking forward to getting on the road in a couple of weeks, and we will talk to you in 2 weeks.
Goodbye, folks. Take 3,792. Done.
Bye.